On this episode, two medical mysteries that defied the experts.
Something is wrong with my child. Can somebody please just tell me what's wrong with my kid?
They kept saying, hey, wait, he'll grow, he'll grow. We waited, and he didn't grow.
When Ricky Getch celebrates his second birthday, it's all too clear that there's something very wrong. He weighs only 18 pounds and can fit inside a shoebox.
I always knew I was different than everybody else.
My biggest worry was that we would find out what it was, but we would just find out too late.
Then, Noel Valero's life begins to spin out of control when a series of bizarre symptoms takes over.
The pain just kind of engulfed me.
I was very worried that he was going to wind up in a wheelchair.
I was frightened. I braced myself for the worst.
In the spring of 1986, Yvette Qualls was finishing a degree in social work at a college in Tallahassee, Florida. While she spent most of her free time in church, she never expected to find romance there.
When we first met, I was 20 and Charlie was 25.
The thing that really attracted me to her to start with was she just radiated the personality that I was looking for.
We dated for 2 weeks and then got engaged. I was always considered the most level-headed person. For me to only spend 2 weeks with someone and then get engaged, that was just a little off character. But I just loved the way he thought about the world and the way he treated other people. We got married on January the 24th, 1987.
2 years later, the Getches are ready to think about becoming parents.
Charlie and I had started trying to conceive. We tried for over a year with no success. The next plan of action was that we go on a low dosage of fertility drugs. Everybody was asking us, well, when are you going to have a baby? When are you going to have a baby? Emotionally, it was really hard because I was really scared that it might not happen.
But just as Yvette begins to accept that she may not have a child of her own, she receives some thrilling news.
I went into the doctor's office and found out I was pregnant.
I was really excited to know that we were pregnant because of the difficulty we'd been through to have the baby.
On October 16th, 1992, Yvette goes into labor, and after 16 long hours, she and Charles welcome their son into the world.
We decided to name our baby Charles Frederick Getch Jr. after Charlie, and we decided to call him Ricky.
There's nothing compared to holding your own son or own daughter in your own arms for the first time.
I adjusted to the routine of being a new mom, I think pretty well, except for the lack of sleep.
The best thing I liked about being a father is being able to have him with me, we relaxing in front of the TV and both taking a nap. And if he moved, I was wide awake in a heartbeat.
But it's not long before the new parents notice something unusual about their son.
Ricky didn't feed very well initially. He had trouble latching on. I was nursing him every 2 to 3 hours. The problem was that he didn't take a lot at one time. So I was really concerned.
Worried that her son isn't getting enough to eat, Yvette makes an appointment with Ricky's pediatrician. However, the doctor is confident that nothing is wrong.
And he said, he seems to be pretty healthy. The doctor recommended that we just continue to feed him. I said, well, but he's really smaller than all the other babies that I have seen. He just kept telling us that, you know, he seemed healthy other than he was small.
But Ricky's sluggish appetite persists, and by the time he's 3 weeks old, the infant has gained only a few ounces. He's hardly bigger than an average newborn.
I could put his head in my hand and his feet would not even touch my elbow. Still, at 2 months, he was still fitting in my arm, and that concerned me. The doctors kept telling her to just wait, that he'd start growing.
With each passing week, the young parents begin to accept that their son may simply be petite. But one December evening, when Ricky is 2 months old, a frightening incident makes them reconsider everything.
I went back to the bassinet to check on him, and when I got back there, he was making kind of weird gurgling sounds.
There was mucus all over the place coming out of his nose, and that scared us, being new parents.
He was struggling to breathe, and so we knew it was an emergency. I think my biggest fear at that point in time was that Ricky might actually just stop breathing. Immediately, we grabbed Ricky and got in the car.
And I probably broke a few speed limits getting there, but he's my son, my newborn son. I had to get him to the hospital so he could get the proper care.
He sounded awful. We were just scared that he was struggling to breathe. I thought that we were going to end up in the hospital with a really, really sick baby.
When we finally got to the ER, they took him back, gave him a breathing treatment.
And the doctor told us that he had bronchiolitis.
Bronchiolitis is a common condition characterized by severe inflammation and mucus buildup in the lungs.
The treatment for that would be antibiotics. The doctor felt really comfortable that he was breathing fine and that if we went home with the medicine that he would be okay. Ricky did fairly well for about 4 to 5 weeks before he had another episode of a respiratory infection. When we took Ricky back to the doctor, he was just like, well, some kids get repeated respiratory infections. So the doctor didn't seem alarmed at all.
In fact, over the next 8 months, Ricky is hit by a bronchial infection again and again.
Ricky would get sick every 3 weeks. Instead of a kid getting older and getting better, what we saw was a child who seemed to be getting sick more and more and more often.
Making matters worse, Yvette can't help but notice that her son is still not growing.
When Ricky was 13 months old, he weighed about 16 pounds, 4 ounces. A regular baby will weigh 23, 24 pounds at a year. So Ricky was well under what he should weigh for that time. The doctor was like, well, you've got to remember, he's been sick a lot. He's had respiratory infections. Let's just see how he does when he starts not being sick so much. But I knew it wasn't normal for him to keep being sick. I went to find another pediatrician. He said all that mucus and the fact that he didn't gain weight, those are the symptoms of cystic fibrosis.
Cystic fibrosis is a genetic condition in which mucus builds up in the lungs. It initially causes breathing problems and eventually leads to severe lung damage and early death.
I was alarmed. I knew that if we had that diagnosis, that we were looking, at a kid that wouldn't even make it to 35. And that is the hardest thing that I think I went through. Ricky was tested for cystic fibrosis in January of 1994.
I was thinking, is he going to die?
Since the day their son Ricky was born, Yvette and Charles Getch have suspected that there's something wrong with him. At just under 2, Ricky Getch is the size of a child half his age and is plagued by constant respiratory infections. The family's pediatrician is confident that he's suffering from cystic fibrosis, a potentially life-threatening condition.
As a mom, waiting for results from tests are excruciating. To think that I could actually lose him, that we would only have that short amount of time, those kinds of fears for me were really hard.
But after 48 hours, the doctor has some welcome news.
The test came back, he did not have cystic fibrosis.
For me, that was like, thank God it's not cystic fibrosis. I know something's wrong with him, but it's not that. When Ricky turned 2 in October of 1994, Ricky weighed 18 pounds. 2-year-olds weigh anywhere from 28 to 40 pounds. So already Ricky was weighing 10 pounds less than the smaller kids his age.
I always knew I was different than everybody else because everybody was taller than me. Everybody always had a little bit more like muscle or fat on them, and I was just like skin and bones.
The problem was that Ricky only literally ate 3 to 4 bites of something and he was done. So I knew he wasn't getting enough calories.
It was a very constant battle, and we'd try to get him to eat more and he'd start screaming.
When I was younger, sometimes I wouldn't eat as much because I'd get full really fast. I didn't get hungry, so I just wouldn't eat that much.
It was just hard as a mom knowing that you need your child to eat, and he just really wasn't hungry. Ricky didn't ask for food. I just knew in my gut. I knew that there was something wrong.
The scary part was the unknown. Didn't know what was causing it, and that's what really worried me.
At the end of her rope, Yvette takes Ricky back to his pediatrician and demands an explanation.
The doctor said he has been a really sick kid, and we're gonna label him as failure to thrive.
Failure to thrive is a catch-all term for children who aren't gaining weight at a normal rate.
I was just thinking, so you're gonna sit here and tell me that I have a 19-pound, 2.5-year-old, and that I'm just supposed to think that everything's okay?
Desperate for answers, Yvette goes from specialist to specialist, but no one can explain why Ricky isn't growing.
I was going on into 2 years, over 2 years, into a search of what was going on with my child. I'd taken Ricky to so many doctors. Ricky had had so many tests, and I'm sitting here going, something is wrong with my child. Can somebody please just tell me what's wrong with my kid?
They kept saying, hey, wait, he'll grow, he'll grow. We waited. He didn't grow.
As time ticked on, my biggest worry was that we would find out what it was, but we would just find out too late.
As kindergarten approaches, Yvette and Charles are heartsick, knowing that in school, Ricky will be different because of his tiny size.
I knew that if Ricky didn't start growing, people would laugh at him, pick on him, and call him names.
In kindergarten, sometimes I'd have to have help getting into the seats because they were too high. I had this really bad bully. He'd pick on me, call me midget, all this stuff. I always felt like I was kind of like different than everybody. For the most part, that was the most frustrating thing about being smaller.
At 5 years old, he's still in baby clothes, basically. It's heartbreaking. I knew there was something wrong all along, but to see him was heartbreaking.
There was no doubt in my mind that there had to be something that was going on that people were just missing. So I went out on a search, and my search led me to Dr. Parks.
I first saw Ricky when he was 6.5 years old. His mom brought him for another opinion about the reasons for his failure to gain weight and to grow in height.
Dr. Parks looked at Ricky's charts, he looked at Ricky's history, and it was almost like for the first time, I had a doctor who treated me as a partner in trying to find out what was going on with my kid.
Dr. Parks immediately notices something Yvette and Charles have always overlooked: the particular configuration of the features on Ricky's face.
Ricky had a normal-sized head and a small chin. At 6.5, he was about the size of a 3-year-old, but he was unusually thin. I concluded that Ricky had Russell-Silver syndrome.
Russell-Silver syndrome, or RSS, is a rare form of dwarfism. In healthy individuals, the genes that trigger cell multiplication control a child's growth. But in patients like Ricky, for some unknown reason, the genes turn off, stunting growth and resulting in extremely small stature.
I'd gotten kind of scared about just hearing the word Russell-Silver syndrome. I would just have to stop myself and say, God, you gave me a beautiful child. Please just let everything work out and let him be okay. What I found is that Ricky wasn't gonna die. While Ricky may be short, And while Ricky may never reach what we would consider to be, normal family height, what I did know from that is it wasn't a death sentence. That was the most important thing. If it was Russell Silver, I could live with that. My concern was that if Ricky kept growing at the rate he was growing, that he wouldn't even be 5 foot tall when he was an adult. Ricky, at the time when we were looking at his growth chart, was headed for about 4'9", final adult height, which for a guy is devastating. That just wasn't an option.
While no other doctor recognized the condition, Ricky's lack of appetite and inability to grow are the main features of the disease.
I think the problems with weight gain are complex. Some of it's reflux, some of it's just a poor appetite. There's also the issue that the number of fat cells may be lower than that in the average child.
When we finally got our diagnosis, I was very happy because here he is, 5.5 years old. We finally find out what's wrong with him, why he's not eating, why he's not growing.
Dr. Parks goes on to tell the family that while most types of dwarfism are incurable, growth hormones have been proven to reverse Russell Silver syndrome. There's a good chance that Ricky could be normal if they start the treatment right away.
My parents told me that I had Russell Silver syndrome. They told me that I'd have to start taking all these shots and I wouldn't necessarily be as big as the other kids, but I knew that the shots would help me grow.
Dr. Parks also prescribes a drug to stimulate Ricky's appetite.
4 or 5 days after Ricky started that medication, he actually said he was hungry. For most parents, that wouldn't mean a whole lot, but for me, I'd gone almost 6 years. I'd never heard the words, "I'm hungry," ever come out of his mouth.
For so long, he was off the growth chart. And finally, he started easing back onto it, and that was a celebration for us.
I felt like I started catching up to my classmates in height and weight was probably around 4th and 5th grade. I wasn't the shortest anymore. One of the biggest moments about catching up in school was I used to have a bully, and I finally caught up to that kid and actually outgrew him. And one day I was just like, "See, you can't call me midget anymore. I'm bigger than you."
While they are thrilled with their son's progress, Yvette and Charles can't help but wonder why it took so long for doctors to diagnose Ricky.
At that time, there were no tests available to see whether he did or did not have that condition. Russell Silver syndrome occurs in roughly 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 100,000 children.
I'm not sure why so many doctors miss this diagnosis. I guess because it's so rare. Probably a lot of doctors have not heard of it. The frustrating part of being on this long road to diagnosis was all the doctors kept missing it.
Ricky's always been such a fighter, but I was really afraid that it could take an emotional toll on him.
When Ricky Getch was 6.5 years old, he was diagnosed with Russell Silver syndrome, an extremely rare type of dwarfism that can be treated with growth hormones.
My hopes for getting Ricky treatment was that Ricky would get to be 5'4". That was my dream goal. 5'4" is normal height range in my eyes for a guy. It's a little bit short, but it works.
Today, Ricky has made a full recovery and is enjoying his senior year of high school to the fullest.
Ricky is 5'9". Never thought I'd see that day when he hit 5'9". Really, never thought I'd see that day.
Now I'm 18. I love just hanging out with friends, going outside, throwing the frisbee around, just anything a normal teenager would like to do.
It's great to see him come from what he was at 5.5 years old, weighing 25 pounds, to 18 years old and being 5'9". It is great. It's an answer to prayer.
I think it's helpful for other kids with RSS to meet me, hear my story and all that, because they can see someone that has RSS just like them and know that they're not out of luck. They look up to me and they can see that they won't always be the small kid at school.
We've been extremely blessed. I mean, I feel like we've had so many miracles. Ricky's happy, he's healthy, he's got a great self-esteem, and he's turned out to be just an awesome young man. And as a mom, what more could you ask for?
We'll be there. We'll support him all the way in everything he does. We've done that ever since he started this journey, and we'll be with him the whole time.
My parents never gave up. They kept fighting for an answer, pushing for an answer, kept going to all these doctors to see why I was so small. If they hadn't have kept pushing, I would not be as tall as I am. I like to thank my parents for never giving up on me and finding an answer.
Next, Noel Valero, an active, healthy father of two, is forced to face a terrifying constellation of symptoms that turn his entire world upside down. In the fall of 2000, 40-year-old Noel Valero had it all. A thriving career, a happy marriage, and 2 children he adored.
We were living in West Windsor, New Jersey. Eric was 9, Alina was 11. So they were both in middle school at the time.
As a dad, Noel is so involved. Noel has an energy and an enthusiasm to everything that he's done that's contagious. He has a wicked sense of humor, and his attitude towards life is just amazing.
And after working for years as an aerospace engineer, Noel had just opened his own information technology company.
It was always his dream to do his own business.
What I liked most about setting my own hours and being around for the kids was if they had a Little League game or they had a dance performance, there would always be a parent present.
Once a college athlete himself, Noel makes a point of staying fit and seems to be in perfect health.
I've always been an athletic person, did everything I could to stay active. I considered myself to be pretty healthy.
We were thinking at the time that we were indestructible.
But that winter, as the holidays approach, Noel begins to notice something strange.
I was blinking more than usual. Whether I wore glasses or contacts, people noticed I was blinking a lot. And it would not stop, even if I willed it to. I was embarrassed. My optometrist had checked out my eyes, and everything was fine.
The eye doctor did think that perhaps his eyes were a little drier than usual, or that he was reacting to the contacts.
We tried different things. We would try eyelid washes, we would try different contacts. It would subside for a little while, and then it would come back. It always felt like I had something in my eyes.
With each passing month, Noel does his best to put up with the weird blinking spells. But it isn't long before he finds himself grappling with a bizarre new problem.
Noel and I would walk our dog almost every morning together. And I remember looking over at Noel and wondering why his nose was pointed skyward.
My head was craned up about 45 degrees, and I didn't even realize I was doing it, so it was less obvious to me than it was to her.
I tried to point it out to him because I could not figure out how someone could hold their head up at such a weird angle and not know that they were doing it.
I didn't notice how frequently it was happening until we were setting up a camera system in the store. We'd set up a surveillance camera and we were checking it out. While we were looking at the playback, I noticed that my head was like that 25% of the time. And I asked the guys, am I always like this? And they all said, yeah.
I was very worried about the fact that Noel's symptoms just didn't seem to make sense.
But when Dawn encourages him to check in with the doctor, Noel refuses. He's confident that the freakish tic will eventually subside on its own. Nothing could have prepared him for what happens next.
I was up in the bedroom and I went down the stairs. The very first step, my head just tilted back in a spasm and I lost my balance. I ended up sliding all the way down the stairs.
The kids and I were watching TV and we heard this horrible crash. We went running out. Then it was Noel lying at the bottom of the stairs on the landing. He was twisted. We're lucky that he wasn't badly hurt.
I was frightened by what was happening. I had this ideas that I had a seriously incapacitating disorder like Parkinson's disease that was eventually going to kill me.
Over the past 9 months, Noel Valero has endured a terrifying series of symptoms. He blinks almost non-stop. His neck spasms in a bizarre tilted position. And now, he's suddenly lost his balance.
I realized that there was definitely something really, really wrong with me, that I really needed to try to find an answer. I really needed to seek professional help to find out what on earth was causing it. I was even more frightened that I wouldn't be around for the kids. I decided to see a neurologist. He took a history when I told him that I'd been a full-time IT consultant. His first reaction was it was repetitive motion syndrome.
The neurologist suggested that Noel have physical therapy to stretch and strengthen the muscles of his back and chest.
It was kind of a relief, actually, because it meant it was something I can deal with. I was going to physical therapy 3 times a week, and I was doing all the exercises at home that I needed to do.
But after a month of physical therapy, Noel realizes that he's not getting any better. In fact, he seems to be going downhill fast.
Suddenly, I noticed that I couldn't even lift my right arm. My right arm just simply wouldn't go up. That was alarming. I went back to see the physical therapist right away, and she did a series of tests, strength tests on my right arm, and she said that I had absolutely no response out of my right tricep. It was paralyzed. It was like being hit with a ton of bricks. I had another fear that what happened to my tricep was just the beginning. You know, was it the first step in something a lot worse happening to me?
I was very worried that he was going to wind up in a wheelchair, that it was going to be something that incapacitated him in a profound way. My biggest fears about Noel's degeneration was that it appeared to be accelerating. I was really worried about him being able to be self-sufficient and being able to retain that level of independence.
I managed to talk to a fairly well-known neurosurgeon who had an office in the area and explained to him, listen, you know, I was doing physical therapy and then suddenly my right tricep was paralyzed. It's an emergency.
The neurosurgeon immediately orders a battery of tests, including an MRI of Noel's right arm. But incredibly, he can't find a single thing out of the ordinary.
I was so frustrated that the doctors could not tell us what was wrong. I really thought that once he saw the neurologist that it was something that we were going to be able to fix.
Overwhelmed, the Valeros head home. And over the next few months, Noel does the best he can to grin and bear the mysterious symptoms. But it isn't long before he's struggling with a frightening new problem.
I had back pain since college, so I was able to rationalize by just blaming it on stress. But this pain was my entire back. I was in pain pretty much around the clock. The pain just kind of engulfed me. It went from something I could tolerate to something that suddenly went beyond anything I'd ever felt. And it seems like it almost happened instantaneously.
It became so bad that he went to the doctor.
After performing a thorough head-to-toe exam, the physician isn't sure what's triggering the agonizing pain. But he prescribes a strong painkiller to help manage Noel's discomfort.
They helped a little bit for short bursts of time, but nothing really took care of it.
Noel was a person who would not let anything slow him down and stop him, so he just moved right along and did what he had to do and was a dad and a worker and a husband.
The pain got to a level sometimes where it really just made it difficult for me to do things. Driving was totally unbearable. I mean, even for like 5 minutes was completely unbearable.
And he decided to give up the clients that he had that were an hour or 45 minutes away because the drive was just too much for him.
That was a very difficult thing to do because my business was growing. It was starting to boom. For me to scale it back just didn't feel good. And it probably fueled more anger, more frustration.
Noel is a very driven, very ambitious person. And when he stopped being able to do everything that he wanted, the way he wanted to do it, he was very upset with himself.
I realized I wasn't fully functional anymore. I wasn't going to be able to support my family in the way I was used to being able to support them. The anger was, why is it happening to me? And the frustration was, how can I fix this?
Over the past 5 years, Noel Valero's life has turned upside down. He suffers from bizarre blinking spells. His head is often locked in a strange position as his neck spasms out of control. And now, he's living with harrowing pain that no medication can curb. Making matters worse, he's been forced to cut back his work hours, and his family's finances are on the line.
I forced myself to continue because if I didn't do it, we would have been in dire straits. And that was probably the biggest struggle I've ever put up with in my whole life.
During the next few months, Noel continues to seek out one doctor after another, but none of them can shed any light on his condition. And as the weeks drag on, it's clear that he's become a shadow of the man he once was.
Probably one of the most disturbing things about this whole experience was the way Noel's personality changed as a result of the pain and the issues that he was going through.
I was slowly becoming a kind of a different person. I was less agreeable. I was quick-tempered. I probably didn't even realize what kind of effect I had on my children and my wife. No idea.
I was very upset by how much this had changed his relationship with the kids. He found fault so often that I ended up giving up trying to have a family dinner because the whole family dinner routine became very, very stressful and painful for us.
By then, the pain was to the point where I'd almost pretty much withdrawn from my family.
Noel was in so much pain that he just stretched out on the floor all the time.
I was just in my own painful little world, trying to survive the pain. And inside my head, I'm just worried about what's going to happen to me. Did I have to fear for my life? That probably started one of the lowest points in my life because I really thought I wasn't going to live much longer.
The Valeros have all but given up hope of getting a diagnosis by the time June of 2007 rolls around. But Noel puts on a brave face to celebrate an important milestone.
It was Noel's 25th reunion, and we went back and met up with some of his friends from college.
As fate would have it, a lot of my former classmates were fairly well-connected neurologists. They recommended that I go to Columbia University.
Noel's friends refer him to a neurologist who specializes in movement disorders, Dr. Roy Alcalay.
My first impression of Dr. Alcalay was he was a bright, young neurologist who really cared about his patients.
Mr. Valero came with a few complaints that maybe to the naked eye would seem completely not related to one another. He was blinking a lot, and his neck was twisted to the right and backwards.
Dr. Alcalay thinks he knows what's behind Noel's mysterious decline. In order to confirm his hunch, he orders an MRI and performs a series of neurological exams.
The neurological examination consisted of a thorough movement motor examination. Based on the history, the physical examination And the neurological examination and the MRI, I diagnosed Mr. Valero with dystonia.
Dystonia is a rare movement disorder. In a healthy individual, an area of the brain called the basal ganglia helps control muscle movements throughout the body. But in patients like Noel, for some unknown reason, the basal ganglia malfunction, causing involuntary muscle contractions.
Dystonia can happen at rest, or it can be even worse with action. It's contraction against their will of different muscles. Dystonia can strike anyone, but people who constantly do repetitive movements are more prone to it.
Well, it was a relief to have a name for the problem, obviously. I now knew what I was dealing with.
Dr. Alcalay explains that all of Noel's symptoms followed a well-documented trajectory.
Dystonia has a classic progression that we cannot quite explain. What is clear from Mr. Valero's presentation, that it's not just that there's something in the eye that makes him blink frequently. There's not just something in the neck that makes his neck be twisted. This is all one condition that is affecting different body parts. In a way, one can think of Mr. Valero's neck and back as if it's exercising 24/7. So this excessive workout that these muscles are receiving from the involuntary increased tone is often painful. It can be very debilitating.
And now it's all too clear that the paralysis in Noel's right arm was triggered by the physical therapy he received.
Just trying to work on the strength of the muscle usually doesn't alleviate the symptoms, but can make them either unchanged or worse.
Unfortunately, Dr. Alcalay has even more sobering news for Noel.
There is no cure for dystonia. When he first presented, his symptoms were relatively rapidly progressive, and we were very concerned. Sometimes with dystonia, there is a chance that it will progress to other body parts as well. If it affects the legs, the patient cannot walk, and I couldn't tell him when I saw him what will happen. I didn't know.
It was a consolation to know what I had, but still I had that lingering possibility that it would progress into that worst case scenario, and that would incapacitate me within a few years. It was life-shattering to hear that. I braced myself for the worst.
Over the past 7 years, Noel Valero has endured a bizarre constellation of symptoms. He blinks uncontrollably, his neck randomly tilts up in spasms, and he experiences incapacitating back pain. Now, he's learned that he's suffering from dystonia, a rare movement disorder, and if left untreated, it could spread to the rest of his body, leaving him unable to walk.
There was the fear that, my dystonia would become generalized, which would mean that I may become incapacitated. It was just something that alarmed me because I needed to be productive and not a complete drain on the family finances. We had a daughter getting ready to graduate from high school, and college was looming. I couldn't put that into jeopardy.
Fortunately, Dr. Roy Alcalay believes he can relieve much of Noel's pain and reduce his symptoms by using a substance associated with cosmetic procedures, Botox.
The toxin therapy was injected in the major muscles that were creating the most havoc on me. They were temporarily paralyzed, so the severity of the spasms were lessened to a great extent.
Noel noticed a difference right away after the first Botox injection.
It was really an unbelievable feeling to have some relief from the pain. It allowed me to try and enjoy parts of life that I wasn't enjoying anymore. It allowed me and my wife to start to try to repair our relationship again.
After the first treatment, I saw Noel become happy again. He wanted to see some of the sights of New York and spend some time in Manhattan as a couple.
While Noel is overjoyed to finally have some relief from the incessant agony, he and Dawn can't help but wonder why it took so long to land a solid diagnosis.
I was so frustrated, thinking about how much time Noel wasted being in pain and being not able to live his life because he hadn't been diagnosed.
Making the diagnosis of dystonia is difficult. If a physician has never seen dystonia before, it's very unlikely for a physician to be able to diagnose dystonia.
Today, 3 years after his diagnosis, Noel is taking life one step at a time. While he'll never be entirely free of the pain and uncontrollable spasms, he's embracing each day with optimism.
Today I'm feeling pretty good, as great as anyone can be with this disorder. It's not 100%, but it's enough where I can enjoy life again. I'm able to do things that I didn't think I'd be able to do. I mean, the simple things like just being able to travel, see my son's lacrosse games, go visit my daughter in college. Things that seemed so far out of reach 3 years ago is possible. I still can't do what I used to do, but I can live life, and I'm happy for that part of it.
He is back to the ambitious, go-getter, fun, funny, intelligent person that I fell in love with, and I am so relieved to actually have him back.
Determined to keep others from suffering as he did, Noel has founded the American Dystonia Society, which focuses on patient support and awareness.
I realized that I could still make a difference. When you get dystonia, it's a very isolating disease. We reach out to those people to let them know they're not alone.
Noel is a connector kind of a person, and he's making new friends because of dystonia. What I'm looking forward to in our future together is to enjoy life and spend time with friends and family.
Looking back, I know that I was not an easy person to deal with when this was developing. And she never left my side, never stopped supporting me. And I thank her for that. All I can say is I love my wife very much.
I am incredibly proud of Noel. He is the kind of person that can overcome obstacles. He has dystonia. Dystonia does not have him.